Would have had the same security as every other member of the royal family who attended that event.
Yeah.
But of course, he didn't speak to his brother at the funeral.
No, he wouldn't, would he?
So if he's trying to fix it, honestly, a funeral is where you should put all differences aside, because it's not about you. It's about respect to the person, the family of the person who's gone, which was his uncle. It was his Diana's sister's husband had died. So yet they didn't speak. They didn't speak in the church. They didn't speak when they left the church. Incredible, isn't it?
It's awful, because that moment is when you realise that we are all mortal, and at that point you should all other things should transcend that. But not.
Well, this move is being branded as Operation Bring Harry In from the Cold, because apparently he's a bit fed up with his life in Montecito. Does that mean with his wife?
I don't know.
Oh, no. Apparently he's dissatisfied with advice from his American-based image expert.
Well, they've had about 10 of them, haven't they? They're on to their number 11.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Stephen Dixon, and thanks for joining us on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome to the Camilla Tominey Show. Lovely to have your company this Sunday morning. Has the government turned its back on the elderly this winter, as nearly 800,000 pensioners will lose out on winter fuel payments? I'm going to be joined by the Paymaster General, Nick Thomas-Symonds, to discuss that. Kevin Hollingrake, the Shadow Business and Trade Secretary, will be here. I'm going to be asking him why he's backing Kemi Badenoch to be the next Tory leader. I'll also be joined by her rival, leadership hopeful Tom Tugendhat, who is edged out Mel Stride from the competition. Can he jump ahead of his rivals and surprise the polls to clinch the Tory leadership? The former chair of the 1922 committee, Lord Graham Brady, who has been making headlines, particularly in the Telegraph, serialising his book, where he shares the secrets behind his discussions with prime ministers, often before they've been forced to resign. It's fascinating stuff. He's going to be here in the studio with me. And as Starmer and Biden brush off the threat of a war from Putin, we'll be speaking to Sir Simon Mail, the former Defence Chief of Staff. We've got 90 minutes of punchy politics ahead, so don't go anywhere. Let's go through the newspapers now with Jake Wallace-Symonds, the editor of the Jewish Chronicle. Jake, lovely to see you this morning. It's a bit of a worrying headline, this axis of evil, I'm talking it, because we've got these dual stories currently sort of populating the front of the Sunday papers. We've got the issue over whether we are going to sort of allow Ukraine to use these Storm Shadow missiles and have the full capability that they need to defeat Russia. And we've also got a story in the Sunday Telegraph and other papers talking about this alliance between Russia and Iran on sharing nuclear secrets, which strikes me as pretty damn worrying.
Yeah, I mean, that part of the world and that developing axis of evil is the biggest threat to global security. And as time goes by, it becomes clearer and clearer. There's this building alliance between Russia, China and Iran. And this story on the page 13 of the Sunday Telegraph describes how there's been a sort of nukes for missiles deal, apparently, or fears of that, between Moscow and Tehran, whereby Iran provides the missiles, Russia provides nuclear secrets the other way. And this comes on the back of the news last week that Iran has got enough uranium, apparently, for 4 bombs. Now, that uranium still needs to be weaponised. It's not complete, the process isn't complete, but it places Iran very close to nuclearisation in terms of 4 bombs. We previously thought it was only 1.
It's absolutely horrifying. And also, I suppose these two stories are related because, I mean, are you worried that if the go-ahead is given to Ukraine to use these Storm Shadow missiles with their full capability, that it pokes the Russian bear and then might lead Putin into doing more with Iran, which could be even more catastrophic than just the notion of a NATO alliance enabling Ukraine to try and defeat Russia. And let's be honest, what this means is missiles being dropped on Russian territory.
Yeah. I mean, I think we need to get away from thinking we mustn't poke the Russian bear. I mean, the Russian bear doesn't need any poking. It's embarked on its own programme with the Iranians, with the Chinese, to try to undermine the democratic free world in Israel, in Ukraine, potentially in Taiwan, and then from there forwards. It's not because of what we're doing, it's because of what they are. They want to undermine and subvert us. We need to get real and get some unity together, rather than talking about in the press, debating whether we can send Storm Shadows or not. Yeah. The first time the Russians should hear of Storm Shadow missiles being authorised to fall in Russian territory should be when they land. Yes. There shouldn't be this perception of disunity between the Americans, between the British, the French and all that, playing out in the public, making us look disunited. We need to be strategic and united and strong and enforce a deterrent. The West, NATO, is much stronger than Russia. Even the axis of evil, as it were, combined, doesn't overshadow the West in terms of our capabilities. If we just have strong leadership from the White House, a strong sense of unity and common purpose, and that's what's lacking at the moment.
Rather makes a mockery, doesn't it, of the nuclear deal that was struck between the West and Iran some years ago. I mean... Yeah, I mean, that's been a mockery for some time. Donald Trump pulled out of it, of course, and then Biden tried and failed to get back into it by way of appeasement. I mean, I get the whole idea of keep your friends close and your enemies closer, but I think after everything that's been going on in Israel, that probably doesn't look like a very prescient approach. Let's move on to domestic matters, because there's been a dressing down for Keir Starmer. What's happened? It involves another man buying frocks for his wife, Victoria.
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, we thought that, I mean, so Keir Starmer has been describing the Tory sleaze years, you know, Boris Johnson's wallpaper and all the rest of it. Well, these are stories which could have come out of that period, only they've attached themselves to Keir Starmer rather than the Tories. So it surrounds Lord Ali, who is worth 200 million quid. There was a cash for access scandal already, the Sunday Times revealed last week, I think it was, involving him getting a number 10 security pass to entertain donors at Downing Street when he shouldn't have it. And now it turns out that he's given Sir Keir this year so far £18,685 for clothes and glasses.
My goodness.
Plus £20,000 for accommodation, plus £20,000 for office costs, and all of that has been declared. I mean, how does Sir Keir Starmer spend almost 19 grand on clothes and glasses in 1 year? I don't know.
Also, it's not renowned for sort of snappy dressing. Well, I think his wife Victoria often looks lovely. But well,
I mean, that's where the controversy comes in, because in addition to that, apparently he's been giving money to his wife Lady Victoria, which hasn't been declared, and that's where the apparent indiscretion has come about.
I'll be speaking about this to Nick Thomas-Symonds, because we all know that Keir Starmer is a stickler for the rules. He knows the rules, Jake. So that's right, quite why he's late with this declaration, we'll have to find out. The other story that we just wanted to touch upon was the Observer remarking that City figures and Labour insiders have warned Starmer, less gloom, more optimism. I just thought this was interesting from the Observer, because you would expect that newspaper to be on Labour's side. And actually, along with its sister paper, The Guardian, they're not quite enjoying what they hoped would be this new era for Britain. They're not quite enjoying what Labour's coming out with, and particularly this scaremongering, Jake. I mean, it's not great for business, is it? It's not great for inward investment to see the Prime Minister constantly talking down the state of broken Britain, the state of the NHS. Things can only get worse.
Yeah, I mean, The Guardian and The Observer appear to have gone from cheerleaders to critical friends. That move has happened over the last week. And, of course, we had last week Andy Haldane, the former chief economist at the Bank of England, criticising Rachel Reeves for talking about this 22 billion black hole before she's got a plan to fix it. He thought that it should have been wrapped up into this is what we're going to do about it. Because if you want growth, as the government constantly says that it does, you need to have confidence and stability. And those two things are undermined if you're constantly talking Britain down, as it were, and trailing a dastardly autumn budget that's going to, and how much pain it's going to cause and so forth, with fears of tax rises and capital gains tax increases and all that sort of stuff. So Labour does seem to be challenging its own policy in some ways.
Again, I'll be asking Thomas-Symonds about all of that, and this idea that the Treasury won't give the figures on the 22 billion black hole for some reason. He's the Paymaster General, so he should be able to answer some probing questions on all of those issues, particularly with regard to Britain's finances. Labour's on a suicide mission, though, in a literal way, Jake, because it wants to push through the assisted dying bill, according to the Mail on Sunday. pretty controversial. Look, we knew that he supported it as Director of Public Prosecutions. Historically, he has always been on the side of assisted dying. And to be fair, I've interviewed Esther Ranson. I know you know her too. She makes a really compelling case for this when it comes to people who are terminally ill. The trouble is, in countries like Canada, they've brought in assisted dying, and it's been used by people who have been suffering from depression, which I find quite troubling.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very, very grave matter, this. Obviously, there couldn't be anything graver. In 2015, that was the last time there was a free vote on it, and the motion was defeated by 330 to 118. So Keir wants to bring it back, look at it again, and I totally understand why people with terminally ill loved ones who are suffering hugely want to bring it to an end in a way that they could choose rather than leave it until it gets worse. But yes, you're right. I mean, there are examples in Canada where it's legal that are quite hair-raising. There was that one in March of a 27-year-old woman with autism and ADHD who was granted the right to end her own life, despite her father saying that she wasn't in her right mind and it wasn't in her best interest. And of course, in 2022, there was a Canadian Paralympian, former army veteran, who requested a stair lift in her home and received a letter saying, have you considered assisted dying? So this sort of stuff, I mean, look, the Labour's proposal is only restricted to terminally ill adults who have 6 months life expectancy. I mean, sometimes those expectancies are frustrated and they go on longer and longer, or are wrong, rather. And so, so there isn't, an immediate danger of that happening. But the worry is that once you've opened the door to assisted dying, it might creep over the years to encompass other cases of mental ill health, depression, and cases like in Canada. Yeah,
well, indeed. And you mentioned the point about the Paralympian. Dame Tanni Gray-Thompson has raised concerns about this on behalf of the disabled, saying that it could put them under undue pressure and make them feel like they're a burden, which I think is the last thing. And old people as well. Yeah, the kind of granny killers. I mean, you can imagine an old person saying, oh, don't mind me, I'm too much of a hassle. I'm quite happy to shuffle off and you can have your inheritance now and all that stuff. And we obviously don't want to encourage anything like that. It really goes against the sanctity of human life. One for further discussion, no doubt. Own goal. The Sunday Times reports that England risks a ban from its own Euros. So we're hosting the Euros in 2028. And this is following an intervention, or at least a leaked email that's been seen by the Sunday Times from the head of UEFA to Lisa Nandy, concerning Labour's plan for a football regulator. Just break this down for us, Jake.
That's right. So the plan for a football regulator has been around for a long time. It's mainly a fiscal regulator, but there has been speculation it might bleed over into things like match times and kick-off times and that sort of thing, regulation. The UEFA is concerned about this. In the email from the head of UEFA, Theodoridis,
well pronounced.
He said to Lisa Nandy that he rejected government interference in football.
Yes.
But the real headline grabber is that UEFA has threatened to ban England from the competition that we're hosting.
Yeah, that could be a bit embarrassing, a bit awkward.
In retaliation. So obviously tempers are quite high.
And also the head of UEFA, whose name I will not pronounce because you've done it for us, has written to Lisa Nandy. He wrote to her on September the 2nd. As yet, no response. I would suggest that football fans might want a bit more urgency from the government on this issue, Jake.
Well, I suppose they didn't realise that the emails were going to be leaked, but either way, it's always a risk.
It's always a risk.
Either way, yes, let's hope that football comes home.
Indeed so. Amen to that. Thank you so much, Jake, for joining me this morning. Coming up next, as I've said, I'm going to be speaking to Paymaster General Nick Thomas-Symonds, MP. He's going to be joining us live, so don't go anywhere. We'll be back in 3.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
What prompted you to go on your incredible journey?
Well, I was fighting my own demons at the time, before I started the walk, and it had been a long journey, if you like. And, I knew that I needed to make a change, and my daughter had just flown the nest. I was a single parent before this, and previous to that, I was ex-parachute regiment. And I knew that I needed to make a change because if I didn't, I'm not sure where I would have been now, if that makes sense. So, yeah, something just came into my head at the very end of July and said, look, go and walk the UK coastline. And that's exactly what I did. And 6 years later, we've just finished.
You met your missus on the journey as well, didn't you? So truly, Chris, a transformative journey for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, look, you step into the unknown like that, you know, you have no idea how things are going to work out. You go out with so little expectation, but only really with the aim to, you know, for me personally, to come back feeling a lot better than what I was before I left. And that certainly succeeded. So everything that happened along that journey was one big learning curve. And I got to learn a lot about myself, a lot about, you know, the public and people. And yeah, it was just a life-changing transformation for me. And, you know, I learned so much, and I know what I want to do with the rest of my life as a result of it. And I met the most amazing people, and, you know, I worked hard. 6 years of carrying your house on your back isn't the easiest feat in the world, I can promise you that. But it was worth every single step because, I rescued a dog along the way. I met my now fiance, Kate Barron, along the way, and we had a baby together along the way as well. So to start in the position that I did and then end up with all of that coming over the line with me was just something that I never expected. And I couldn't have dreamed it up, to be honest.
GB News, the People's Channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News. You're watching the Camilla Tominey Show. I'm delighted to be joined now by Paymaster General Nick Thomas-Symonds, MP for Torfaen. Lovely to see you this morning, Minister. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. Can we discuss this story on the Sunday Times about Keir Starmer breaching parliamentary rules by failing to declare that Lord Ali bought his wife, Lady Victoria, high-end clothes? This is following a donation from Lord Ali towards Keir Starmer's own wardrobe and indeed spectacles. Can't the Starmers afford to buy their own clothes?
Well, firstly, Camilla, very good to join you on your show this Sunday. In respect of this, firstly, well, look, around the world, if you go to different countries, in America, for example, there's a specific budget that is made available there to the President and the First Lady to make sure that they look their very best when they are representing that country on the world stage. Could I just refer specifically to what you're saying about the declaration? This is hardly a case of things being hidden. On the contrary, actually, the Prime Minister was attempting to be transparent. Advice was sought on coming to office as to what was appropriate to donate. The advice was followed, but that advice was then doubted. Further interrogation took place. That was, I understand it, earlier this month. And now that additional declaration will be made. It's not a case of hiding.
I know, but he's late to... Hang on, though. Let's be honest. Isn't Keir Starmer very much a man who is a stickler for the rules? As he constantly reminds us, he was the former Director of Public Prosecutions. In fact, during Wallpaper Gate, which is still fresh in the memory, in April 2021, he said to the then Prime Minister Boris Johnson that he should be aware of the rules, that he should know that he has to declare any loans or credit arrangements or any donations to his political activities within 28 days. 28 days, Prime Minister, yes. He will know that any donation must be recorded in the Register of Ministers' Interests and that under any law, any donation of over £500 to a political party must be registered and declared. So the rules are very clear, said Keir Starmer. So why doesn't Keir Starmer know the rules if he thinks that his predecessors should have known them?
Well, firstly, there's absolutely no comparison between Partygate and what happened there with Boris Johnson. And
Wallpapergate. Donations to wallpaper. It's no different than donations to wardrobes.
Well, come on, it wasn't just about wallpaper, was it? I think we can both agree
Well, it was in this case.
That isn't the only scandal.
No, but I'm saying about Keir Starmer referred to Wallpapergate. He said on Wallpapergate alone, the Prime Minister should know the rules. So on Wardrobegate, if we can call it that, the current Prime Minister should know the rules.
Well, he did know the rules about 28 days, and that's why, when he came to office, he sought advice immediately about what to declare, followed that advice, but then doubted it, subsequently interrogated it, again sought out further advice, and has now made the declaration. But that's twice actively seeking out advice as to what the appropriate declaration should be. Making declarations.
Why does a former lawyer earning a six-figure salary need Lord Ali to pay for his glasses and his suits and his wife's dresses? Have you ever allowed another man to buy your wife dresses?
No, not that I'm aware of, Camilla, no. But in terms of being the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom and being the Prime Minister's spouse, I think we would agree, we would want them to look at their very best of whatever political party they were on the world stage.
Yeah, but this was when he was in opposition partially as well, wasn't it? These donations came in before he was Prime Minister. And then, to make it even more worrying, you've then got Lord Ali having been given this number 10 pass. Why else would he have been given this pass if it wasn't as a thank you for some of these cash gifts?
Well, to your first point, when the Prime Minister was the leader of the opposition, he's still holding a senior political office, and obviously he was aspiring to be the Prime Minister and to represent our country on the world stage. To your second point, Lord Ali is a self-made millionaire. He's a long-standing donor. That's a matter of public record to the Labour Party. But he's someone who's been a member of the House of Lords since 1998, has a substantial record of public service in that time, over 25 years in the House of Lords, and was, as I understand it, given a pass for a short period of a few weeks for the transition. But he is somebody who's been in our Parliament for over a quarter of a century.
I mean, I'm somebody who's on television every week. I pay for all of my dresses myself. I don't quite understand this. And I think the public will look at it and think that it's hypocritical, because in the same week or two, we've had news that the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, who earns £160,000, has claimed £3,700 back over the last 5 years to pay the energy bills at her constituency home in Leeds. You've got Lord Ali giving the Starmers thousands of pounds worth of clothes and spectacles, while you're taking the winter fuel payment from almost 1 million pensioners. Doesn't seem right.
Well, on the issue about, when you're talking there about the Chancellor, would apply to all MPs who operate in two different places.
Should it? Should it apply if you're taking that money away from pensioners?
Well, hang on. Let's just take this in stages. There was the expenses scandal 15, 16 years ago, and then independently it's been looked at. What is appropriate? What do members of Parliament need to function? Obviously, where you would live, you obviously wouldn't have fuel payments for where you live, but it's where you have a second property, and that's been what's been deemed independently reasonable for our Parliament, our MPs to function. And it's policed independently now, and I think that's really, really important. But to your point about winter fuel and the means testing of winter fuel payments, that isn't a decision we wanted to make. It isn't a decision we expected to make. It's a decision we've had to make in the circumstances in which we find ourselves.
Well, you've made the decision.
Of £21.9 billion. If we do not deal with that black hole, and this is not a future theoretical thing in this financial year, these are
choices. These are all choices, aren't they? I mean, Rishi Sunak was right to say to the Prime Minister, I think in Prime Minister's questions last week and the week before, you've made a choice. You've decided to stop the winter fuel allowance, but you are going to give train drivers who are already on 60 grand a year a pay rise. That's a political choice.
We've made a political choice that we have to fill this black hole. And if we don't fill this black hole, then the economy and the stability of the economy will be at risk. That is why.
I suppose the problem is
just to make this clear, there was a different
from the perspective of the public, though. This isn't very Labour. This idea of the Starmers taking thousands in clothes and spectacles, the Chancellor claiming back her fuel bill. I know that all MPs can do it, while pensioners are stripped of their allowance. I mean, none of this feels like it represents good old-fashioned Labour working class values. That's the problem with it. It's the perception of it, Mr. Thomas-Symonds.
Well, no, I think that we came into our office, we had the independent pay review bodies had been set up on public sector pay, the process put in train by the last government. They had done absolutely nothing in terms of having funds available to actually meet what was recommended. The independent recommendation was 5.5%, and we met it. I would suggest that was a highly reasonable thing to do, and very much in line with Labour values. But also, let me just say about this black hole, 'cause it's so important. If we do not take action in terms of filling this black hole, and we put the stability of the economy at risk, it will happen again as with Liz Truss. It's working people that pay the price, and we will not allow that to happen.
But there's another disconnect as well, which I think might explain why Keir Starmer's approval rating is tanking since he took office. It's the same with the prison release scheme, isn't it? There's a degree of sort of hypocrisy at the heart of Keir Starmer being Mr. Law and Order, yet at the same time releasing these prisoners. And now we learn that one of these offenders sexually assaulted someone within an hour of release. So if any other of these criminals who have been released early go on to commit more crimes, will Labour take responsibility and apologise to the victims?
There were no good options on prisons when we came to office, Camilla, because if we hadn't taken any action and carried on as the previous government did, you'd literally have had a situation where judges would not have been able to send serious, violent and sexual offenders to prison because there would have been no places for them. And I'm sure you can appreciate the extraordinary risk to public safety that would have presented. If people would have known going to prison, they wouldn't be sent there. We were left with an absolute shambles of a position, frankly, where the prisons were bursting at the seams. Again, we've had to introduce the situation where prisoners are released at 40% of their sentence. We're excluding from that people sentenced for violent offences for 4 years or more, those sexual offenders, domestic abuse offenders. But you just mentioned the individual case. Anyone who is released is still on licence and can be recalled to prison. But again, Camilla, this is not a decision we wanted to be in a position to make. We'd like to have actually, and I've shadowed various justice roles over the years. I can remember the government promising, to build 20,000 more prison places back in 2021. They had the money to do it. Their own ineptitude, they didn't build the places. Had they done so, we wouldn't be in the position we are today.
OK. Nick Thomas-Symonds, we have to leave it there, but thank you very much indeed for your time this morning. Lovely to speak to you. Interestingly, there's a story in The Sun on Sunday today about HMS Dartmoor being empty. It's got 700 places, but there's some problem with radon gas. Can the government deal with that? Who knows? Coming up next, I'm going to be speaking to Shadow Business Secretary Kevin Hollingrake. We've also got Tom Tugendhat coming in and Sir Graham Brady to talk about his explosive book, Do Not Move a Muscle.
This is good luck. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Many happy memories, and 9 in 10 Brits say certain foods evoke feelings of childhood nostalgia, with the mousse-like powdered dessert, Angel Delight, the most loved. Joining us now...
I'm surprised by that.
Yeah, what, Angel Delight?
I'm surprised it's number one. Yes, very surprised. Well, to talk us through all of this is creator of the Crazy Sexy Food podcast, Hannah Harley-Young. Morning.
Hi. I've brought a selection of things that really define my childhood, particularly the Viennetta ice cream. And I have brought you some butterscotch Angel Delight.
Yay!
I'm going to expose myself live on camera and say that I've never tried Angel Delight.
Hannah?
I know. I don't know what that says about me.
I thought that was apple puree, actually. I'm so excited. Is it good?
Oh, my goodness.
Did I make it okay?
Oh, yeah. But to be fair, Hannah, it's not that hard to make.
What is it, though? That's what's so funny about Angel Delight.
It's chemicals. It's just chemicals in a bag.
I mean, it's a load of additives, which, I mean, one thing that's also really interesting about all these nostalgic foods when you look at them is that a lot of things have been discontinued over the years.
Oh dear.
So it makes you wonder, how did this one kind of get through the cracks?
Angel Delight came out #1, didn't it?
It did come out as #1. And also sort of in the top 5 was fish and chips, something I still eat today. Fish fingers, still a staple of my diet. Mr. Whippy, in that same survey, they said that 95% of people find that a taste from their childhood will take them back more than looking at a photo. And that's something that's really interesting for me, and it's the basis of everything that I do, and the reason really why I set up Crazy Sexy Food, or one of the reasons, should I say, was that I love this concept of memories of food. You know, I've interviewed hundreds of people over the past 5 years, and when I get to that question, you actually see their face relaxing, and there's something that it evokes emotion.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back. So much more to come in the next hour. I'm going to be joined by the Shadow Business Secretary, I should say, Kevin Hollingreight, and Tory leadership hopeful Tom Tugendhat. But first, here's the news with Sophie Reaper.
Thank you, Camilla. It's 10 o'clock and these are your latest GB News headlines. Some breaking news this morning. 8 migrants have died overnight whilst trying to cross the Channel, French authorities have said. It's also been reported that 200 people were rescued in a 24-hour period over Friday and Saturday. This news comes less than 2 weeks after a separate incident where 12 migrants died after a boat sank off the French coastline. We'll bring you more on this story as we get it. It's been alleged that Sir Keir Starmer has broken parliamentary rules by failing to declare donations of clothing for his wife, Victoria. The Sunday Times has reported that the gifts came from Labour donor Lord Ali and covered the cost of a personal shopper, clothes and alterations for the PM's wife during the election campaign. Sir Keir tried to make the declaration earlier this week, but as MPs are required to register gifts within 28 days, he was too late. Speaking earlier, Foreign Secretary David Lammy defended the PM's actions. This is what he had to say.
This is not a breach of transparency rule. It's a Prime Minister that's acting positively to make sure that everything is above board. And this money comes from a long-standing, over 2 decades. Lord Ali has been in the House of Lords. He has been a big supporter of the Labour Party. He's a self-made man. And I think there is nothing to see here, really.
And there's more potential trouble for Sir Keir's government, as it's revealed pensioners could be left £1,000 worse off this winter. This comes on top of suggestions that Labour could also axe the single-person discount on council tax at next month's budget. The party have thus far refused to rule this out, stating that difficult decisions need to be made in order to fill the so-called £22 billion black hole left by the Conservatives. And finally, the crew of the first ever private spacewalk have returned to Earth this morning. Let's take a look at the moment that the SpaceX Dragon splashed down.
Standing by for a splashdown of the Polaris Dawn crew. And there you can see. As you can see on your screen, and by the cheers behind us, the Polaris Dawn crew has successfully splashed down.
How exciting. Those are your latest GB News headlines. For now, I'm Sophie Reaper. More from me in the next hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thanks, Sophie. Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Lots more still to come. In just a minute, I'm going to be joined by the Shadow Business Secretary, Kevin Hollingreight. What does he think will happen in the Tory leadership? Who will be in the final 2? I'll be asking him that. I'm also going to be joined by one man who hopes to be in the final 2, but will he? Tom Tugendhat. And I'll also be speaking to the former chairman of the 1922 committee, Lord Graham Brady. He's here to lift the lid on his new book about the downfall of 5 prime ministers on his watch. It's fascinating stuff, so do not go anywhere for that. But first of all, let's bring Shadow Business Secretary and MP for Thirsk and Moulton, Kevin Hollingrake, into the show. Lovely to see you this morning, Mr. Hollingrake. Thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure.
I don't know if you've been able to catch up with Sir Graham Brady's book extracts and my interview in the Telegraph over the weekend, but one of the key revelations is this idea that there was only ever 10 letters of no confidence in Rishi Sunak in his safe, which therefore begs the question, why on earth did the former Prime Minister call the early election? Can we not reflect on it now as being a catastrophic mistake?
Well, the easiest job in the world, Camilla, is to stand on the sidelines and criticise, isn't it? And so Rishi made the judgment with the best of intentions. Lots of people say, well, you should have gone later. But he thought that was the best time to go. I think, for me, I've got the highest regard for Rishi. And I think when he took over, and I was very close to him when he took over back in 2022. He knew it was an almost impossible task to turn our fortunes around in that kind of what would have been a maximum of 2 years. You had inflation rate 11%. You had the economy predicted to go into recession. And where is it now? The economy is growing the fastest in the G7. Inflation's at 2%. He wanted to stabilise things for the country. He didn't do it. He didn't take that job because he thought he had a good chance of winning the next election. He did it because he wanted to serve the British people. And I have massive respect for him for doing that.
I note that you're supporting Kemi Badenoch. I've got Tom Tugendhat coming into the studio in just a moment. Why Kemi for you?
I think all 4 candidates are very good, actually, and they're very closely, there's very close race between them. So I don't think that there's any one person that's going to sweep the board like perhaps has happened in previous elections. But I worked for Kemi for 18 months. I have a very high regard for her. I saw her working up close. She is a very strong person, very decisive, willing to say what she thinks. And I think that's quite a rare commodity in politics these days. And I think lots of people like that. But also, the thing I really liked about her working as one of her ministers was she picks good people. She makes sure you're on aiming for the right objectives, but then lets you get on with it. She trusts people to get on with it. And of course, if you get it wrong, she'll tell you you've got it wrong. But other than that, she's hugely supportive in terms of what you want to do. And that's what I experienced in my time, particularly when we're trying to get justice for postmasters.
She's not too direct then. I mean, some people criticise her handling of the Henry Staunton affair, and equally, she is accused of rubbing people up the wrong way.
Well, I thought she was bang on with Henry Staunton. I mean, that's proven in terms of the evidence he's given since and what else has come out. So, again, she took decisive action. I mean, when you're a strong person, you're bound to make, you have your opponents and your proponents. That's a reality. So trying to please all the people all the time is not a recipe for success, in my view, not in politics. You look at the great leaders of the past, there have been, at times, controversial figures willing to take on received wisdom. That's Kemi all over. I think she's very effective in terms of her policy making, and I think she'd be a brilliant leader and a brilliant Prime Minister one day.
Now, the Conservatives are trying to make hay with these accusations concerning Lord Ali providing money for Keir Starmer's wardrobe and his wife, Lady Victoria's wardrobe and all the rest of it. But the Tories don't really have a leg to stand on this, do they? I mean, it's not as if previous administrations weren't up to their neck in similar allegations of sleaze. We all remember Wallpapergate. So you haven't really got a leg to stand on, have you?
Well, we made mistakes, no doubt about it, in the past. But the huge hypocrisy here, the one rule for one, another for another here, is Keir Starmer stands up in the House of Commons and says, "Oh my God, Boris Johnson's a few days late with the declaration of interest." This is 72 days late, and I had David Lammy on your programme say, nothing to see here. Well, a rank hypocrisy from Labour. We're there to hold the government to account. Yes, we made mistakes in office. We deserve to lose the last election, but we don't deserve a Labour government that is making decisions both in terms of things like conflicts of interest, but also in terms of winter fuel payments, which is absolutely disgraceful policy. We'll see hundreds of thousands of people in poverty having their support withdrawn this winter.
I just correct you on that because it wasn't on my programme David Lammy appeared. I did speak to Nick Thomas-Symonds, however, but let's move on swiftly. Mr Lammy doesn't seem to want...
He was on our news
programme, fair enough. Yeah, he doesn't seem to want to come in here and get a grilling from me. I can't think why. The same can be said about his boss, Keir Starmer, and indeed the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, but we all hold out hope. There's nothing to be afraid of. It's just some honest questions that you need to answer. But Mr Hollingrake, let's also look at this idea that obviously you're now shadow business. And I appreciate the Tories need to restate themselves as the party of business, but it's really hard for you to do that. You're talking about Labour being hypocritical. Aren't you being hypocritical? At the end of the day, you sort of talked right and governed less, as your proponent for the next Prime Minister, Kemi Badenoch, pointed out in her launch. You're no longer the party of business because you put corporation tax up.
That's a complete nonsense, Camilla. I mean, Kemi made some good points in terms of some examples of that, but that wasn't across the board. I mean, you remember, people have very short memories, including you, might add. You know, £500 billion of support for businesses and households going through that COVID crisis and cost of living crisis. It said there were 500,000 businesses predicted to go under. That's what we provided whilst in office. And you ask businesses today whether they prefer a Conservative government or a Labour government that's going to completely revolutionise the workplace, not in a good way. 60% of firms now think the UK is going to become a less attractive place to invest. And the potential tax changes they're going to bring in, which might have very devastating consequences for businesses. Every business person I speak to is incredibly nervous about the Labour government and would welcome a Conservative government back in power.
All right. Kevin Hollingrake, thank you very much indeed for sparing us Sunday morning to speak to GB News. It's been lovely to speak. Thank you very much indeed. Well, in just a minute, as I just said, I'm going to be speaking to the Tory leadership candidate, Tom Tugendhat. I'll be asking him why he thinks he's the best man for the job in opposition. Don't go anywhere. Back in 2.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
More than half of people aged 50 and over feel happier from having a friendship, and 46% feel a sense of belonging too. Tomorrow is the start of Friendship Month. The Oddfellows, a non-profit friendly society that provides older adults with opportunities to create new friendships, is now inviting more people this September to join their local groups and expand their friendship circles through giving a taster activity at local community centres. We're joined now by Jane Nelson, who's the CEO of Oddfellows. Good morning, Jane. Thanks for joining us. As someone in my mid-30s, I've even noticed as well that my own friendship group has diminished over the years as kind of, you know, people get married and have kids and they kind of drift apart and don't make time for each other.
How important is it to have friends separate to your family? What benefit does that bring you?
As you do get older, you do lose friends for a variety of reasons. Either you lose touch or they have an illness or they pass away as you get older. The stats show that people love spending time with their friends. It always takes somebody, doesn't it? Somebody's got to make that first step to send a text to say, do you fancy meeting up for coffee or do you fancy going to the pub or whatever the arrangement's going to be. But sometimes somebody always has to make that first step and text or phone. And I think the other key thing is it usually tends to be the same person, but that doesn't matter as long as that connectivity is made, because that's what you need. You need the connectivity. If you think about when we were children, we'd go around the playground and say, will you be my friend? Well, we don't tend to do that as we get older. But be brave, look on Oddfellows website, see all the amazing events we've got on, go to see what's going on in your area, oddfellows.co.uk, or you can telephone 0800 028 1810, and our team will be more than happy to point them in the right direction of their local events, and there's so much going on, 300 going on.
GB News, the People's Channel. Sunday nights on GB News. From 6, Neil Oliver. At 7, it's Free Speech Nation with Andrew Doyle. At 9, Mark Dolan. And at 11, get set for the week ahead with headliners. Tomorrow's papers tonight. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking, this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News. You're watching the Camilla Tominey Show. I'm joined now by Tom Tugendhat, Tory leader candidate and MP for Tonbridge. Lovely to see you.
Good to see you too, Camilla.
Before we get into domestic issues and indeed leadership matters, I need to play the clip of Trump from the debate against Kamala Harris because it's been a talking point all week. And I know you like commenting on foreign affairs and you were chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. Let's just be reminded of the pet-eating quote.
I'm not your cooking correspondent.
No, I know. Let's hear it.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in, they're eating the cats.
They're eating the cats, they're eating the dogs, Tom.
Look, this led to a moment of, can I just say, coldness in the Tugendhat household because Dasha, the cat,
yes,
heard me listening to this on a clip, and all I can say is she didn't stay on my lap after that.
And it does beg the question, and I think it's legitimate for me to ask you this: who would you rather won the US election, Trump or Harris, at this stage?
Well, look, I always avoid this question.
No, please don't.
Camilla,
we don't do avoidance of questions on the Camilla Tominey Show.
I am very publicly avoiding this question, and the reason I'm very publicly avoiding it is because I trust the American people to get the right answer.
Now.
The reason I do is because I want to work with whoever the American people choose.
So you can work with Trump, even though he's made these comments. I mean, is this man mad? Is he talking about Haitians eating pets?
Camilla, when I led the campaign against China in our own country, standing up, as you know, to the dictatorship that we've seen have such an impact on our universities and here at home. One of the things I was working with his administration on was on banning Huawei, you know, that network in our telephone network, to make sure that we were properly protected. I will work with whoever the American people choose. You know,
wouldn't you prefer Trump? I mean, he's more hawkish. Don't you think the world would be safer? Harris hasn't got any foreign affairs experience at all.
I've got to be honest with you. I have seen Trump doing the Abraham Accords in the Middle East. I've seen him standing up against Iran. I've seen him calling out Putin in various different ways. I've also, however, seen Biden letting down Afghanistan. I've seen Biden letting down various other things.
So the Democrats aren't particularly good on foreign affairs, so you should be supporting the Republicans as a good Tory.
It's a mixed picture. Because
hang on, I don't understand why you're reluctant to back Trump. He's a righty, you're a righty.
Because I stay out of other people's democratic debates. And the reason I do is because I want to make sure that whoever they choose, we can work with, because our job is to work with whoever's in the White House.
Wouldn't the world be safer under Trump, even though he's a bit mad and thinks that Haitians eat pets?
Look, I've been a huge fan of what Trump has done in the Abraham Accords and what he's done on many areas of foreign policy. And so, you know, let's see who the American people choose.
What do you make of this new axis of evil, Russia and Iran now sharing nuclear secrets?
Yeah, well, this is what I've been warning about for years. And Camilla, you wrote about it. It's incredibly worrying. It is incredibly worrying. And, you know, I have been sanctioned by Russia, by Iran and by China because I've called out all three for the abuses, not only that they're doing abroad, but what they're doing here at home. You know that the Iranians have been threatening and trying to kill journalists here in the UK. We know about, I think, 15 different incidents.
Yes, that doesn't surprise me at all.
It's
horrific. Yet, I mean, the Democrats, who you're refusing to say that you wouldn't back in favour of Trump.
I'm refusing to back anybody.
Were the ones who cozied up. They cozied up to Iran. I mean, it's amazing now, isn't it? The Western world cozied up to Iran and offered them a nuclear deal, and now Iran is trying to cozy up to Russia for its own unique nuclear deal that could actually result in World War III.
Camilla, and in 2015-16, I can't remember exactly the year, I called out the JCPOA, the so-called deal with Iran, because I thought it was a terrible deal. It was an appalling deal, and I wouldn't have done it. And that was a deal, sadly, that was done, you're right, it was done under a Democrat administration.
So their leadership on foreign affairs has been woeful.
Look, I have been very critical of them, but, you know, NATO is also incredibly important, and what we need to do is to make sure that we're defending NATO and we're standing up for NATO.
Well, on that, what's your view on this Storm Shadows issue?
Yeah, use it.
Yes. What about fears of escalation? Look, we're poking Russian bears again.
Sorry, but this is 20 years ago. Russia threatened to nuke Denmark over an argument about 15 years ago.
Russia threatens to nuke everyone, but do we say that we're not meant to be taking them seriously, not least when they're in conversations with the Iranians? The Iranians, Jake Wallace-Symonds was doing the papers, said that they've now got the capability for 4 nuclear bombs, not just 1.
I'm not going to comment on any of that, forgive me, because I was asked to keep the King's secrets when I was Security Minister, and I will keep them. But the challenge that we've got with Russia is how do we dissuade them? And you've got two choices, right, when you're dealing with a bully. Do you allow yourself to be beaten up and pretend that it'll go away? Because they don't, you know. Or do you stand up and do you punch back?
Yes.
And I think what we've got to do is make sure the Ukrainians are able to punch back. If they don't, we know what's happening next.
I know, but
the
British
Russians
missile landing on Russian soil?
Well, there's already British ammunition landing on Russian soil in terms of high explosives and so on. So this is Russia trying to make a difference out of something that isn't desperately different.
Let's bring ourselves back to domestic matters. So how are you? Why are you fourth in this? Why did you just narrowly beat Mel Stride?
I didn't just narrowly beat Mel Stride.
Well,
I'm
you haven't got as many votes as Badenoch or Jenrick or Cleverly.
That's not true. I've got exactly the same number as Cleverly.
All right, OK. So you're tying with Cleverly, but why do you think this is? Why are the MPs not convinced by you?
I'm the one who's gaining momentum, and the reason I'm gaining momentum...
Well, apparently Mel was gaining Mel-mentum, and we all know how that ended.
Mel's a dear friend, you know, and he's got a fantastic voice in the Conservative future. But you know, I'm gaining momentum in this. And the reason I am is because people can see that this is a chance that we have to reset the party. Look
Hang on, though, you're a centrist candidate, aren't you? You're the one nation.
I'm the Conservative candidate. I'm the one
people say, look, we've got to be more right-wing. We've got Nigel Farage, I think Kemi Badenoch said, eating our lunch.
Camilla.
You've got reform. Are you a bit too wet to
Camilla,
win?
do you
Sorry
remember...
to say it.
Do you remember during COVID?
I don't want to be rude, but is that the case?
Camilla, do you remember during COVID, you were very key in talking about things like vaccine passports. Who's the only one who voted against them?
I didn't talk about vaccine passports. I was very anti-lockdown. I was lockdown.
Exactly right. And you were against vaccine...
I was saying vaccine passports weren't a good idea.
Exactly right.
And
who's the one who voted against them?
Yes.
Me.
OK,
right?
so you're strident on COVID, but you are quite one nation-y. You know, you voted for Remain, now you're talking about being slightly Eurosceptic. I know, I asked him this question. Do you regret voting for Remain?
What I don't regret is standing up for British interests. And look,
but do you regret voting for Remain now?
No, I don't. It was a decision that was taken at the time, and ever since then, what I have done is I have consistently supported the democratic will of the British people.
True.
We voted to leave. I have consistently voted to leave.
Yes.
What I'm now doing is I'm setting out a vision for a different future, and that's why I'm building on the work that I've done in the past. Now, in 2013, I was highlighting the problem of the ECHR in the battlefield.
To be fair, you were very compelling on this at your leadership launch because you gave a very good argument as to why we should not at least be in some parts of the ECHR.
That's right.
What the public, I think, can't understand is we moved away from the position of the ECHR on things like prisoner voting rights.
That's right.
Why can't we do the same now? Why does it have to be a kind of lock, stock and barrel departure?
That's exactly right. Camilla, but you're asking exactly the right question. And that,
thank God, that makes a change.
The French don't apply the ECHR on the battlefield. The Poles don't apply it in certain areas. The Germans have kicked out 28 Afghans who committed rape and murder and kicked them back to Afghanistan. So, you know, if other European countries who are signatories to the ECHR can do it, why aren't we?
But then when you asked the straight question in 2022, would you leave the ECHR, you gave a straight answer of no.
Well, that was... the question was, do I want to? No, I don't want to. I want to reform it. I want to change it. And I want to make it work for the British people. Now, if that doesn't work, am I prepared to leave? Yes, absolutely.
So this isn't just you throwing red meat to right-wing Tories, like you've been on a journey like Robert Jenrick.
Camilla...
From Remain to Eurosceptic, ECHR ditcher.
I'm completely straight on this, Camilla, and since 2013 I've been writing about this.
To be fair, you have been consistent on it.
I have completely... And it is absolutely... The reason I see the problem is because what I see is an attempt to undermine the security of the British people, and I will never allow that to happen.
I'm going to ask you for a nuts and bolts answer to a straight question, not opining the state of things, please, just a solution. How would you reduce legal migration?
You've got to change the visa numbers, and the next thing you've got to do is you've got to change the way you do benefits so that you change the economy. Because the truth is, this isn't just about visas, it's also about businesses. Every time the government said we're going to bring down the visa numbers, somebody in the business department, somebody in the Treasury, somebody in the Foreign Office, somebody in the Education Department, somebody in whatever, each of the departments went, no, I agree with the principle, but my demand is for it to go up. My businesses need them to go up. My universities need to go up. You've got to stop that. And the way you stop that is you change the economy. You go to a high-wage economy. And the way
are you saying cutting down completely on low-skilled workers? The Office of Budget Responsibility found last week that low-skilled migrants actually end up costing the Treasury 150 grand over the course of their lifetime, because you get all of these Treasury types and indeed economists on the side of mass migration arguing that it's always an overwhelmingly good thing for the economy.
Camilla, do you remember during Brexit there was that guy who was interviewed in Sheffield and somebody said this is bad for the GDP of the country? And he said, maybe your GDP, but not mine. And that's the truth. The Treasury is constantly looking at GDP for the country. And they're right. You bring in more people, you get more work, and the GDP of the country rises. But your GDP per capita, per person, actually has flatlined. And if you look at it over 30 years, GDP per head, adjusted for inflation, has gone up a tiny bit.
Why don't we assess whether we should have migrants on the basis of productivity per hour worked?
Well,
I mean, an economist has suggested that, just in terms of, well, how do we work out whether people actually add value? We have this points-based system, but again, it comes back to that Badenoch, sorry to quote your rival, point about talking right and governing left. At the end of the day, successive Conservative governments oversaw mass migration on sort of Tony Blair and Gordon Brown levels.
But this is my point. This is my point, that most of the migration that we've seen in the last 5 years or so is a choice. If you look at the Tier 2 visa, so the skilled worker visa before December 2020, how many were issued? 20,700. Since December 2020, how many were issued in the points-based system? Tens and tens and tens of thousands.
So that's an abrogation of responsibility on behalf of the Conservatives, right?
But that was a decision by, those who were in Cabinet at the time and the decisions that they made. And I understand why they made it, because it boosted GDP, but it didn't boost GDP per capita.
Remind the GB News audience, are you in favour of a migration cap? Legal migration cap?
Yes, I've set it a very strict legal migration cap at 100,000.
OK.
And, you can argue that...
Could you honour that, definitely?
Yes.
I mean, these people have heard this promise time and again
Camilla,
since the days of David Cameron.
You're right, but the reason I'm setting it now is because we've got 4 years of opposition to set out the policies and the changes in the economy that we need to see. Because you're absolutely right. I can make promises till the cows come home and it doesn't matter. What I want to do is I want to change the economy, change the way we pay benefits, change the way we incentivise business so that we actually see people getting into work, getting that opportunity. And, this is all about things like apprenticeships.
Would you be stricter about withdrawing benefits from people who can work but choose not to? And how would you do that? Because that's been very, very difficult. Mel Stride, funny enough, talked about it on this show, when he was Secretary of State for the Department of Work and Pensions. He faced many, many obstacles in trying to grasp this nettle.
Yeah, it's really difficult, but you've got to be clear. And you've got to be clear. And the only way you can do that is by being absolutely clear from the beginning that as a business, you will not be able to rely on a high migration, low-skilled alternative to employing British people. That's why I'm setting the target now.
How do you get British people to
now.
do jobs that only foreigners seem willing to do? I'm talking about care, I'm talking about cleaning, I'm talking about low-skilled, low-wage jobs. We've got this issue with 9 million people who could work on benefits. OK, some of them may indeed have health problems that prevent them, but this idea that they are of working age, that number has gone up since COVID. We've got a problem that...
Yeah, we do.
But that British people don't want to do these jobs.
Well, we've got a problem that what we've done is we've created a system over 30 years that has allowed people effectively to not just to be parked, but to be forgotten. And that's wrong. It's immoral, Camilla. You and I believe in the dignity of individuals, right? People have an innate dignity, an innate agency in controlling their lives. That's why we believe that, citizens should have the sovereign right to decide their future because they have in themselves their own dignity. And parking them on benefits, pretending that they don't matter and they don't count and just throwing money at them, it's just immoral. And actually it leaves people feeling left behind and left out. And if you want people engaged in the future of your country, and I do, I want to make sure that we're offering the leadership that makes sure that people feel that they have a place. Because for me, being a Conservative is all about patriotism and purpose. The patriotism of believing in the country and the purpose that we all have. Then you need to change the way you're supporting people so that they are brought back into the work system, not because you want their labour, although we do, but because it's about human dignity. It's the best thing for people.
Are you in favour of people keeping more of their money?
Yes.
Having been part of an administration that put taxes up to historic levels?
But that's exactly why I did not support the rise in national insurance.
OK, so let me put this straight question to you. If you were in charge, which tax would you cut first?
Well, the first one you've got to look at is corporation tax, because it's risen so much over recent years.
Under the Tories. What would you put it back down to?
Well, I'm not going to give you an exact figure because
go on. We could be more competitive with Ireland.
So there's a whole range of countries.
It's gone up 6%. How much would you bring it down?
I'm not going to give you. I'm not going to give you a number.
Should
Camilla,
the number begin with a 1 or a 2?
Camilla,
come on, work with me.
You're being naughty, but this is why in 2022 I set out the plan for full expensing, because that again is a tax.
All right, so corporation tax comes down, and then any personal taxes that you'd look to cut?
You've got to be looking at moving up the thresholds, because this is something we've also got wrong.
So unfreeze the thresholds.
Exactly right. So you allow people to keep more of their money, because it can't be right that what you're doing is effectively what they call fiscal drag, which just means that, you may get a bit more pay, but actually the rates of pay aren't going up with inflation.
Tom Tugendhat, I think we need to leave it there because we've run out of time. But I think you've given us a very good impression of how you would lead the Tory party, and we wish you all the very best of luck. You go to conference next, don't you?
Yes.
A bit of a beauty parade.
A bit of a beauty parade.
And then another MP vote. Do you think you're going to be in that final two?
I'm certain I am, because we've got to return...
You're certain? You heard it here on GB News. You're certain you're going to be in the final two?
We've got to return this party.
Who do you reckon you'll be in the final two with?
Oh, I couldn't tell you that.
Come on.
No, Camilla, I'm not going to go there. I've got three very good friends. Well, you know what?
Well, I know you
really
get on very well with her. She's about
really
wine and cheese nights at her house.
She's great fun. No, she's really good fun. She's a great friend.
Thank you very much for coming in the studio today. Good luck with the rest of the leadership contest even. Now, coming up next, one of Tom Tugendhat's colleagues, or former colleagues, former chairman of the 1922 committee, Lord Graham Brady, is here to discuss his book, Kingmaker. It's sensational. It's full of lots of claims about prime ministers, and we're going to be delving into all of them. Don't go anywhere.
Hello, good morning and welcome to your GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. Well, we've got quite a mix in the weather for the second half of the weekend, some sunny spells and showers, but also some cloud and some outbreaks of rain. But there'll also be plenty of fine and dry, settled weather across the south of the country today. So after a cold start, things will be warming up across the south and southeast, and plenty of dry weather and some sunny spells. Across northern parts of Wales and northern England, though, a cloudier day with some outbreaks of rain and drizzle. And across Scotland, plenty of sunny spells, but also blustery showers too. And these could be heavy with some hail and thunder mixed in there too. Now, as we head into the evening, that band of cloud and rain will still continue to slowly sink its way towards the southeast of the country. But across Scotland, well, we'll see those showers during the day. They will eventually ease away and become mainly confined to coastal areas. Across Northern Ireland, the Scottish borders and parts of northern England, we'll see some late evening sunny spells before the sun does go down. But plenty of clouds still across Wales, moving into the Midlands with still those outbreaks of rain and drizzle, and fairly cloudy to the south and southeast too. Now through into Sunday evening, we will eventually see that rain and drizzle to the south ease away, but there'll be plenty of cloud here. But across the northern areas, parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland, we'll see a few more clear spells, much lighter winds too, so it is going to be turning quite cold here. May even see some isolated patches of mist and fog, particularly in rural areas. But to the south, that's where it's going to feel a little bit milder under those cloudier skies. Now for Monday, high pressure will begin to build across the country, which means plenty of fine, dry, settled conditions across the country. And where you catch the sunshine, it is going to be feeling rather pleasant and warm, particularly in those lighter winds. So generally highs of around 21 Celsius down in the southeast, but to the north, highs of 17, possibly 18 degrees.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect, and then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News. You're watching the Camilla Tominey Show. I'm delighted to be joined now by the former Conservative MP and former chair of the 1922 committee, Lord Brady, also known as Sir Graham Brady. For the purposes of this, let's just call you Lord Brady, as it's more straightforward. So, Kingmaker, my goodness me, you decided... I mean, what's interesting about this, Sir Graham, is that at the end of the day, you were always resolutely silent. Journalists like me would be begging you to tell us how many letters were in the safe at any given time, and you couldn't tell us. Now you're laying it all bare. Why? Were you a bit worried about breaking a few of these secrets?
No. I think that they're important things to put on the record for history. I think that I had a unique perspective over a very long period of time, 14 years. And there are some things which clear up misinterpretations or misunderstandings. And, example, in the serialisation of yesterday's Telegraph, the point about the very small number of letters calling for a confidence vote in Rishi Sunak.
Yes.
And obviously that's something you've been pursuing.
Amazing. Just 10 letters in the safe. And so at the time, I think, in the weeks leading up to him calling that early election, we had the likes of former Tory MP Simon Clarke suggesting there were around 50. Everyone's running around going, oh, my goodness, he's going to face a challenge. He never faced any challenge, and yet he called that early election. I mean, Lord Brady, do we reflect on that as being the most catastrophic decision he ever made?
Well, first of all, I just say it's the great oddity of the system, because, as I make clear in the book, I came to the conclusion very early on that the only thing you can say about the number of letters is nothing.
Yeah.
So if Simon Clarke had said he's got 50 letters, and I'd then responded saying this is complete nonsense, there's nothing like that, then people quite rightly say, well, how many are there?
Yes.
So you've got to keep quiet about it. And the suggestion that Rishi was 3 away from
the
having a confidence vote was obviously completely untrue, but it gained some traction.
But the calling of the early election, maybe he didn't know that. Maybe that was a part of his thinking.
Maybe it was, but I'd given no reason to think that.
No.
And
although you do note in the book that Penny Mordaunt is sniffing around the time of the local elections in May. Things aren't looking very good. She comes to you and basically says, "Have we got a succession plan?" What did you interpret that as?
Well, she asked, would it be possible to have a smooth transition if the Prime Minister had walked away? I assumed that she thought that she would be the smooth transition. But I took it all with a pinch of salt because, again, I say in the book, my experience is there always seems to be a surfeit of candidates when there's a Conservative leadership.
Yes, it's funny that, isn't it? Also, we had Dame Andrea Leadsom, when he called that early election, lobbying you.
Well, not lobbying me. It was a question asked in the committee meeting of 22, but waving a letter in the air and saying, if enough of us write letters to you, can we stop Rishi Sunak from doing this? So it was a remarkable day. But of course, the Prime Minister had already been to see the King and had secured the dissolution of Parliament. So,
also, imagine going to the polls if they had tried to unseat Rishi Sunak at that point.
Well, that was my response, of course, and I said that for those colleagues who were seeking re-election, it wouldn't be the best way of starting the campaign.
From the book, I get the impression that you liked working with Rishi Sunak. I mean, he has this reputation for being a bit sort of former head boyish. He's married to a billionaire. He's a bit out of touch. Compared to the other prime ministers, though, how did you find him?
I always found him very easy company. I think, I do comment, he was always very complimentary about the quality of my advice, but then he didn't always ask for it.
Yes.
But as an individual, I found him very easy to work with and very charming, very likeable person.
And also, out of all of the prime ministers, he wasn't prime minister at the time, but he seems to have been the only one that actually consulted you. It was after he was fined for Partygate and said, should I go?
Yeah. Again, I mean, I think that was an indication of somebody who had a real sort of sense of conscience and it didn't feel right to him. But I don't think I gave advice. I ended up setting out what the dilemma was.
Yes.
And really, he couldn't win either way. He would either be attacked for bringing down the government if he'd walked away and Boris Johnson didn't.
Yes.
Or he'd be attacked for staying.
Yes.
And
he was in a bit of a kind of no-win situation there. And let's speak about Boris Johnson. You two did come to blows a lot because you were very lockdown sceptic. He obviously was orchestrating all of the COVID measures that you found draconian, too draconian. That description by Dominic Cummings, his former special advisor, of him being like a shopping trolley is borne out in the book. I mean, on one hand, he's like effing and blinding at the 2-metre wall and the scientists. And on the other, he's making you feel guilty, saying, how many people would you let die, Graham? What happened to the Prime Minister during this whole period?
I mean, it was such a strange time. And, you know, I'd say on the counter side, of course, it was an extraordinarily difficult situation to be in, extraordinarily difficult to be Prime Minister, and then add to that the fact that he was so very ill. And I think that clearly knocked him and knocked his confidence.
Do you think that impaired his judgment a bit?
I don't know that it impaired his judgment, but I think certainly he took a hit and a knock, and I think probably his confidence was less than it usually is.
Although his confidence was brimming even the night before he resigned. So obviously he's been dogged by a series of scandals, Partygate, the Pincher resignation. You speak to him the night before and tell us about that conversation, because he's basically, I mean, he is on a precipice and yet he's digging his heels in.
Yes, and, you know, I think also he made an assumption right at the start of the meeting. He said, so, you've changed the rules. Well, we never changed the rules. So,
with regard to no confidence votes and thresholds and things, because you had loads of MPs and half of his cabinet had resigned by this point. People are wanting to oust him. Really, he needs a friendly tap on the back. Come on now. Well, the time is up. You tried to do that.
I tried to do that, and largely because I think I knew what was going to happen. We had decided to bring forward the election for the 1922 executive, which is the body that was going to make a decision as to whether the rules could be changed to allow another confidence vote. And that was going to happen on the Monday. I think this was the Thursday. No, it was a Wednesday evening. On the Monday, we were going to elect a new committee. And given the mood in the party, it was obviously going to be a new executive that was going to change the rules, and there would have been a confidence vote on the following Tuesday. So I thought it was pretty clear what was going to happen. And I thought it was obviously better for everybody, for Boris himself, for the party, for the country, to have things done in a more dignified and deliberate way than that.
He didn't agree, though.
He didn't agree. As I say again, he was very polite.
But he was quite bullish. He was like, I've done a lot for this party.
Absolutely.
I've been the most successful Prime Minister.
I won this big majority, and of course all that was true. But he'd also dug himself into a very, very difficult situation.
I get the impression from the book, correct me if I'm wrong, Lord Brady, good grammar school educated man from Greater Manchester, that you found David Cameron and George Osborne to be a little bit snooty. Is that fair?
I think a little bit snooty, perhaps.
A bit snobby.
I mean,
did they look down their nose at people like you, Graham, is what I'm saying, I suppose?
What I say is I think they found it a bit difficult to understand people like me. And they certainly found it very difficult to understand how very important to somebody like me the grammar schools are. And you know, for me, that was how I got on in life. It was the obvious, successful route to social mobility. And it was, for them, something that could be treated quite casually.
Yes.
And
well, with the benefit of a high fee-paying public school education for both of them, one at Eton, one at St Paul's. That's probably why. We're running out of time, so I do want to speak about Theresa May. You found her wooden, not very sociable, wanting to take credit for other people's work. Is that fair?
Well, that's something that goes back to when, a long time ago, when we were in opposition, I was on her shadow team. And that was just a fact. If there were opportunities that came in, media bids, she thought she should do them all.
Interesting.
And, of course, she was very ambitious.
Yes.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
No. And then you reveal that Liz Truss threw Kwasi Kwarteng under the bus, told you that it was his fault that the mini-budget had backfired. She, of course, ends up having to resign several days later after Kwasi has gone. You have this strange episode where... You go to, just explain this before we go, you go to see her at number 10, you go to advise her to resign, but by the time you arrive, she pretty much knows what she's doing. But then you have to stay in number 10 because there is a press pack behaving like vultures outside.
I didn't have to stay, but I offered to stay. And again, the odd experience that I had of doing this on more than one occasion, I was very much aware that if I walked out of the front door of number 10, there would be 200 journalists there and cameras.
Yes,
and
asking you, what have you discussed?
What have you said? Yes.
Yes.
So I said it'd be much easier if I can either have a car to take me back to the Palace of Westminster, which is, of course, very close by, but it's the only way you can get there without being in public.
Yes.
Or, if you prefer, I'm happy to stay in the building until you've made the statement.
And you did, and you had a tuna sandwich.
And
but when you
said,
saw her...
let's do that, let's keep you hostage.
Yeah, because people were then saying, oh, Lord Brady's been in there for hours. Actually, you were just biding your time while she made a statement. Comparatively, though, Theresa May was quite tearful when you talked about resignation. By that morning, when you saw Liz Truss, because she had previously been blaming chancellors and all the rest of it, when you actually saw her, it was a short meeting. Why? Did she just knew that the time was up?
I think she realised the time was up. I had the sense that she was quite relieved. Obviously, she'd been under intense pressure for
she's been compared to a lettuce.
Some weeks.
For 47 days.
I mean, I commented the previous Prime Minister's questions that she'd been through, and I saw her immediately after that as well. It was, I congratulated her on simply getting through it, because it was torrid.
Lord Brady, thank you very much for coming in and discussing your book, Kingmaker. It's actually published on September the 26th, all right, and it'll be available from all good bookshops. Interesting. No back chat or backlash from David Cameron or anything at this stage? You haven't had any angry phone calls?
No.
All right. There's still time. But good stuff. We've got that on the screen now, and you can get Kingmaker from September the 26th. Thank you very much. Well, up next, I'm going to be joined by the former Defence Chief of Staff, Sir Simon Mail. He's going to be discussing Ukraine, Russia, and about his book, which is all about the Middle East. So we'll be discussing that in just a moment. Back in 3. Don't go anywhere.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it? Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Meghan Markle is finding it very, very difficult to recruit staff for her lifestyle brand, which is called American Riviera Orchard. There's a mouthful for you. Apart from a jam gifted to influencers earlier this year, the brand is yet to launch any products.
Well, let's speak to our US royal and showbiz reporter, Kinsey Schofield. Good morning to you, Kinsey. Who's going to want that gig?
I mean, there are rumors that Netflix has said, allow us to manage the retail strategy. If she can't manage to find a CEO or somebody willing to work with her, Netflix sees an opportunity there.
To be an influencer, people have got to want to be like you. Do people like her?
I mean, this has been her biggest issue in the last few years, is realizing that there's been a shift when it comes to their popularity. Harry and Meghan believed their own hype when they said on that Netflix series that the reason they were ostracized was because they were much more popular than the British royals. They were more popular than Prince William, more popular than Princess Kate. And their popularity has declined immensely. And now they are desperate to win people over again.
Most people have to be liked or admired, and I put it to you, Kinsey, she'll have difficulty on both fronts.
Netflix is not going to renew this contract. I mean, they are fearful that this cooking show, this polo show, will not connect with the audience. And now they want us to believe that Meghan is at home cooking all this banana bread and having her best friend Chrissy Teigen over for scones. People aren't going to buy it.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Jubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect, and then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. We're going to discuss books now with the former Deputy Chief of Defence Staff, Sir Simon Mail, who has got this new book out, House of War, The Struggle Between Christendom and Caliphate. which is very relevant, actually, as we are still concerned about what is going on in the Middle East. And I suppose you looking at the history of this from the 7th century to the Great War begs the question, is this where it all started, or at least in World War I, the Balfour Declaration? Can we trace everything that's been going on in Gaza now to that?
I think you've got to go back a lot further than that.
I thought you might say that.
Inevitably. And actually, a lot of it is, of course, the significance of Jerusalem for all the three great religions. You know, obviously, for Judaism, for millennia, Christianity, obviously, from the death of Christ 2,000 years ago. And then, really, when it became the third most holy site for Islam in the 7th century, where the Prophet Muhammad went to Jerusalem and left his footprint there. So, all three religions, to an extent, have looked on this iconic thing. So the story there is a good narrative history, I think. It's epic battles between the forces of Islam and Christendom, although the backdrop is, of course, a lot of interfighting within the Muslim world and the Christian world. But it's what I also might call applied history, that if you read it, you begin to understand how people build narratives of entitlement, inspiration, and grievance.
Yes.
And everybody does it. You know, Putin's doing it in Russia at the moment. Osama bin Laden, the book opens really with Osama bin Laden's fatwas, which talk about the forces of Zionism and the Crusaders are back in the land of the Prophet.
Yeah, the historical context to everything that's going on, I mean, it's so complex. It's not particularly closely studied. I note that this book, I mean, from the 7th century to the Great War is a huge period of time, although I note that you leave it at the Great War because there is so much to be said about that region, even from World War I to now. I mean,
that was the old... Well, that would have plugged for my previous book, Soldier in the Sand.
That's right. That
really went from the Great War forward.
This
is a prequel.
Exactly.
And I just felt if people understand the significance of Jerusalem, the fall of Constantinople, the fight for Malta with the Knights of St. John, you know, it's epic. Lepanto, Don John of Austria, Suleiman the Magnificent, the fight for Vienna, which still influences Austrian politics today when it comes to issues of immigration.
Yes.
And, of course, behind it, you've got, inevitably, Sunni Arabs and Sunni Turks fighting Iranian Shia.
Yes.
Well, that's still there. We had the Catholics against the Orthodox. We had Catholics against the Protestants. We had the French in alliance with the Ottomans against the Habsburgs and the Holy Roman Empire. You've got Elizabeth I.
Nobody's ever got on along well in any of these regions.
This is the thing. So the headlines are Muslims, Christians clash, but actually the context is interesting. Why then there? And the individuals have got...
Although when you take this back to the 7th century, it does beg the question, how on earth does anything get resolved? We've got 101 hostages still in captivity. We've got Gaza almost torn to pieces.
Well, there's a degree of empathy, which requires you to reverse the gaze to see an issue through other people's eyes. And then there's a question also, empathy doesn't require sympathy, to understand why certain people are so hard-line about certain issues. You know, take it back, dare I say, on our own doorstep to Northern Ireland.
Yes.
You know, to understand the deep, you know, why people would support a terrorist organisation like the IRA, you did need to understand a very troubled history between Britain and the Irish, to an extent. And almost anywhere that you look at the Balkans, all the areas I've been, go to Iraq when we were there. And a lot of people, and I would say one of the weaknesses sometimes of our American friends, is, of course, they're less beholden to history.
Yes.
And that's a great strength for them.
Because they've got a shorter history.
They do. They don't have a 7th century. They don't have, I mean, great respect, obviously, to the Native Americans.
Yes.
But for the American establishment, many of the issues covered in this book, America as a modern state, as we understand, didn't exist.
Yes.
So they haven't got that reference point. And, you know, when you're looking for important reference points for cultural identity, and for motivations, particularly when people are dispossessed or angry or feeling aggrieved. The Osama bin Laden used to mine very assiduously the history of the Islamic world, and exactly what Putin's doing in Russia.
Yes.
He's mining Russian history for grievance, inspiration, entitlement.
Well, let's just, as we're fast running out of time, which is always the case on this show, let's just bring it up to modern day. What's your reaction to these stories today about Russia and Iran in this sort of strange, secretive nuclear pact?
It's very worrying.
It's
because
really
both regimes are under real pressure. Iran is crumbling, it's brittle, and you might say the same about Putin. They're thrashing around for allies. They feel quite, isolated in many ways, and their friends, when Putin launched his war on Ukraine, he was in a sort of equilibrium with China, you could argue with that. But now he's so much the weaker partner. And they've both become pariah states in many ways. But the nuclear dimension is what, of course, when we have the debate about Storm Shadow...
I know. Where are you in that debate? Advocating their full use? Yes, I think it is, to be honest with you. Now you've got Iranian weapons being used with Putin in Ukraine. You think, well, friends of Ukraine can go the other way. But the danger is, Ukraine, Putin is a very interesting psychological study. Yes. He's had a lot of red lines that he's set and they've been crossed. Yes, he keeps on saying this. And weak, strong men. Tom Tugendhat was mentioning him threatening to sort of nuke Denmark. I mean, this whole poking of the Russian bear has been sort of been poked for decades. And they don't like it. No. They feel real humiliation. And again, that feeds that sense of grievance and entitlement. And there's always a danger that a strong man who's actually a weak psychological case suddenly thinks, I can't give on this one. I keep setting out these red lines. I keep being pushed. I'll do something stupid. And that's the worry, to my mind, with Putin's Russia. Final thought. Trump and Harris, you'll be familiar with the debate. Yep. Got 1 minute left. Who do you think would be safer for the Western world to be the next president? I know it's a hard one after cats and dogs. All my instincts are I mean, I think the Democrats have been appalling guardians. Yes. I would like to think Trump would be. He was certainly a stronger candidate before Biden. A lot of disasters since Biden, but gosh, that's where my instincts would lie. But the individual involved at the centre of it really doesn't give me huge confidence. Indeed, so that's the problem. I think the choices are both quite bad. Thank you very much indeed, Sir Simon Mail, for joining me this morning. As I said, his book, The House of War, is available now, should you want to catch up basically on the history of one of the most sort of disrupted parts of the world, basically. Coming up next, it's going to be Michael Portillo. I'm going to be back next week from the Labour Party conference, so do tune in from 9:30. Apart from that, though, have a brilliant Sunday. Thank you for joining us today.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good morning and welcome to your GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. Well, we've got quite a mix in the weather for the second half of the weekend, some sunny spells and showers, but also some cloud and some outbreaks of rain. But there'll also be plenty of fine and dry, settled weather across the south of the country today. So after a cold start, things will be warming up across the south and southeast and plenty of dry weather and some sunny spells. Across northern parts of Wales and northern England, though, a cloudier day with some outbreaks of rain and drizzle. And across Scotland, plenty of sunny spells, but also blustery showers too. And these could be heavy with some hail and thunder mixed in there too. Now, as we head into the evening, that band of cloud and rain will still continue to slowly sink its way towards the southeast of the country. But across Scotland, well, we'll see those showers during the day. They will eventually ease away and become mainly confined to coastal areas. Across Northern Ireland, the Scottish borders and parts of northern England, we'll see some late evening sunny spells before the sun does go down. But plenty of clouds still across Wales, moving into the Midlands with still those outbreaks of rain and drizzle, and fairly cloudy to the south and southeast too. Now through into Sunday evening, we will eventually see that rain and drizzle to the south ease away, but there'll be plenty of cloud here. But across the northern areas, parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland, we'll see a few more clear spells, much lighter winds too, so it is going to be turning quite cold here. May even see some isolated patches of mist and fog, particularly in rural areas. But to the south, that's where it's going to feel a little bit milder under those cloudier skies. Now for Monday, high pressure will begin to build across the country, which means plenty of fine, dry, settled conditions across the country. And where you catch the sunshine, it is going to be feeling rather pleasant and warm, particularly in those lighter winds. So generally highs of around 21 Celsius down in the southeast, but to the north, highs of 17, possibly 18 degrees.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
You could be the good luck.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Jubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking, this is the nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. They catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome to Sunday with Michael.